If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the channel. And if you're enjoying these stories, there's a link below to buy me a cup of coffee. This is the Chassidic Story Project with Barak Hullman, podcasting from Jerusalem, Israel. This podcast is sponsored by listeners just like you. To become a supporter of this podcast, please go to HasidicStory.com. HASIDIC story.com. You'll never know. You'll never know. You'll never know. You'll never know. Shalom Aleichem, my sweetest friends. So this week is Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, which is the Hilula, the rejoicing in the passing of the great Rebbe, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And so, in honor of the holiday, I'm going to tell stories of Lag BaOmer. But before I begin, I want to dedicate this podcast episode to my son, Levi Yitzchak Magen Avraham, who was born today. I'm recording the stories on Yud Daled Iyar, Pesach Sheni, and had his bar mitzvah today, and has been the most loyal listener of all of my children to this podcast, since he's been listening since he was very young. May Hashem bless him to grow up LaTorah, LeChuppah, LeMa'asim Tovim, Be'ezrat Hashem, Be'simcha. And also to the success of our soldiers in battle wherever they are, the returning of all the hostages, healthy and alive, the refuah shlema, the full recovery of everyone who's been injured or is ill, the comforting of those that lost loved ones, and the continued unity of the Jewish people here in the land of Israel and all around the world. The first story took place in 1996. There's a group of young religious men from Ashdod that were getting ready to go to Meron for Lag BaOmer. And so I should give you a little introduction to Lag BaOmer before I continue. Who was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? Well, of course, he was one of the greatest tzaddikim that ever lived. And many people study Zohar and Kabbalah till today, and of course celebrate Lag BaOmer. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was a direct student of Rabbi Akiva and lived in the time of the Roman persecution in the Holy Land, from around the year 100 to 160 CE. The Romans sentenced him to death for teaching Torah, so he and his son, Rabbi Elazar, hid in a cave for 13 years, where all they did was study Torah day and night. They buried themselves under the ground because they didn't have clothes that would last, and they lived off of a carob tree in a miraculous spring that was in the cave. And the Zohar, which is the primary text of Kabbalah, is attributed to the teachings that they learned in those 13 years in the cave. And on the day of his passing, which is Lag BaOmer, Rabbi Shimon revealed the deeper secrets of Torah to his students, filling the world with a tremendous light, literally a holy fire, before his soul left this world. And so these young men from Ashdod were on fire themselves with the spirit of Rabbi Shimon. And as they were sitting together on their way to Meron on the bus, one of them opened up Ta'amei HaMinhagim and read the customs about a childless couple. It says that there's a tradition to pray at the grave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai on behalf of those that didn't have children and make a promise on the spot that if the couple is blessed with a child within a year, then the next Lag BaOmer, they'll bring 18 roitels, about 54 liters of wine, to be distributed in Meron to those who come and pray at the tzaddik's grave on Lag BaOmer. Now you might be wondering what's a roitel, because I was. It's a traditional measurement used by our ancestors in Eastern Europe, at least those of us that have ancestors from Eastern Europe. Of course, my kids are half and half. My family, pretty much everything in Eastern Europe, and my wife's family, the whole Middle Eastern Jewish world. So when somebody promises to bring 18 roitels, we call it a chai roitel. Chai, of course, is life, the value of 18. And they promised to bring about 54 liters or 14 gallons of wine or grape juice. And this is considered an especially powerful spiritual offering, especially when it's given at the grave of a tzaddik like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So on the bus ride to Meron, one of the young men shared that on the previous Lag BaOmer, he had a friend that made a promise on behalf of a couple that hadn't had children for many years. The couple was blessed with a child, and the next morning, his friend would be distributing grape juice at Meron. And this caused a stir deep in the heart of one of the men that was sitting there. And he thought of a dear friend of his who'd been married for 6 years and was still waiting for the blessing of a child. And without even planning it, he stood up and he said, I accept upon myself to distribute 18 roitels of grape juice in Meron next Lag BaOmer if Be'ezat Hashem, my wife and his friend, are granted a child within the year. And before he could even sit down, another friend in the group stood up with tears in his eyes, and he made the same promise for his friend. And so they raised glasses and they said L'chaim and Mazel Tov. And the next morning in Meron, in the presence of the grave of the holy tzaddik Rabbi Shimon, they repeated their promises again with even more intention. And 1 month before Lag BaOmer, 1997, a miracle happened. The first man's friend and his wife celebrated the brit of their newborn son. And 2 weeks later, the second couple was also blessed with a child. So can you imagine the joy? These 2 young men who had made the promises a year before were now bringing 36 roitel, 108 liters or 28 gallons of grape juice to Meron. Now, many times when we want to do a mitzvah, or fulfill a promise or do something good, Shem puts obstacles in the way. And so these men knew that there might be obstacles, and so they went to a reliable charitable organization in Bnei Barak that specializes in delivering wine and grape juice to Meron for Lag BaOmer. And they personally went to Bnei Barak and delivered 6 large cases of grape juice, and they were assured that the grape juice would be transported to Meron the week before Lag BaOmer. But listen to this, my sweetest friends. Every time the organization sent a delivery to Meron that week, somehow, their 6 cases were left behind. One time the driver misunderstood, another time he couldn't find the cases. They called the office many times, and everyone in the office was just as confused as the Bachrim. It's as if there was an invisible hand that was preventing those cases of grape juice from getting to Meron. And on the day of Lag BaOmer itself, their cases were still sitting in the storeroom in Bnei Barak. And so they had no choice but to go and pick them up and deliver it themselves. But they wanted to go to Meron with their friends, so they planned to go to Bnei Barak, bring the cases back to Ashdod, and then take the chartered bus to Meron. But even though they got to the bus stop on time, the bus to Ashdod left 5 minutes early. And so they're standing there with their precious grape juice, trying to figure out, what is Hashem trying to tell them? And then at that moment, a shirut, a group taxi, shows up right in front of them, and the driver shouts out the window, Ashdod, Ashdod! Who's going to Ashdod? Now, this was such a random thing, because why would there be a shirut in Bnei Barak to Ashdod in the middle of the day? It didn't make any sense. And the driver was a secular man whose name was Rafi, and he helped them load the cases of grape juice in the back of the shirut. And they said to him, Rafi, why are you going to Ashdod this time of day? And he said, honestly, I don't know. It just worked out this way. And as they start driving, they start discussing the price. Rafi wanted to charge extra for the grape juice. And when they explained why they were bringing the grape juice to Meron and about the promises that they had made to the childless couples and the miracles of the births, something changed in Rafi's face. He grabbed the steering wheel tightly and he said to them that he has a sister who's been married for 12 years and still has not merited to have children. I'm transporting your cases for free. But I want you to do this for my sister. When you go to Meron, you're going to mention her name and promise the wine for next year if she has a baby, and I will bring it. So now you understand, my sweetest friends? All of the delays, all of the obstacles were so that these Bachrim could meet the driver whose sister needed a blessing in Meron. And if it wasn't for them, he wouldn't have even known about it. So they got to Ashdod in time to catch their bus to Meron. And every year on Lag BaOmer, thousands, hundreds of thousands of Jews come from all backgrounds to Mount Meron in the north. And the mountain is transformed into a city of celebration with bonfires lighting up the night and music in the air, food and davening. And for many people, it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And others, it's an annual tradition. And in the chaos of Meron on Lag BaOmer, they fulfilled their promise of distributing the grape juice, and they prayed for Rafi's sister at the grave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And after Lag BaOmer, they spoke with Rafi one time, told him that they had prayed for his sister, but then they lost touch. And now listen to this. Almost exactly 1 year later, they hired a van to take them from Ashdod to Bnei Barak for a brit, and the van's battery died just after a few blocks. So they saw across the street was a taxi stand. They went over there and hired the next van. And as they're driving, the driver was excitedly telling them that his sister had given birth at 3 a.m. that very morning, and it was her first child after 13 years of marriage. One of the young men looked at the driver. The driver was looking at them at the rearview mirror, and then the driver turned around and he said, "Excuse me, were you the guys that were riding with me a year ago?" It was Rafi, the driver, and one of the young men began crying, and Rafi cried with him. And Rafi said, "This morning, when they woke me up to tell me the news, I said to myself, how am I ever going to find those guys that prayed for my sister and tell them that their prayers were answered? And then your van breaks and you randomly find me. It can only be from Hashem so that I could share this news with you." And the truth is they were all speechless. And one of the young men took out of his pocket Tfilat HaDerech, the prayer for a journey. And Rafi reached into his pocket and took out a kippah and put it on his head. And he said, "That's it. I'm doing tshuva. I'm going to grow stronger in my faith in my Judaism." You know, when they had set out a year before on Lag BaOmer, they spoke of Rabbi Shimon's power to bring miracles in the world. And they had this plan to bring the grape juice to Meron. But the Ribono Shel Olam, the Master of the Universe, had much bigger plans. All of those obstacles, the forgotten deliveries, the early bus, the mysteriously failed battery in a brand new van, they weren't delays at all. They were Hashem's hand, arranging each detail so that two promises could be fulfilled: a child born and a soul coming back to Hashem. And the next Lag BaOmer they traveled to Meron, but this time they drove with Rafi, who wore a kippah full-time, along with Tzitziot, and his sister, brother-in-law, and their baby girl were in the van as well. And as they walked towards Rabbi Shimon's grave, carrying new cases of grape juice in gratitude, they watched Rafi point to the holy burial place of the great tzaddik and explain to his tiny niece, who was too young to understand. He said, "This is where miracles begin, but never where they end." May we all merit to see our promises be fulfilled, even when there are obstacles in the way. And may all those who need children be blessed with healthy children this year in the merit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and have the schut and have the merit of bringing the 18 roitel of grape juice to Meron next year. I have another story for you. It was Lag BaOmer in 2020 here in Israel. And I'm sure it was different in every country, but here really things were kind of crazy. It's amazing that even though COVID's officially over for a while at our Shabbos table, people are still talking about it. Of course, those of us that had little kids at home, like me, unfortunately the kids suffered quite a lot from the lockdowns and we all got COVID anyhow. So, as everybody knows, I don't have to tell you, it was a time of high emotions. And 2020 was really in the beginning of COVID. People were still learning how to cope with it. And there was a young couple in Jerusalem that was celebrating their wedding day, but they decided to ignore the rules and get married in a private wedding hall. It was a small crowd, and they didn't tell many people about it. But in those days, no one was allowed to gather. And the police burst into the hall and arrested the Chatan and Kala and brought them to the police station. Can you imagine the scene? Everybody who walked past them in the police station sees the Chatan and Kala, still dressed in their wedding suit and wedding gown, being detained by the police. They were there until 3:30 in the morning. The happiest day of their life became really a nightmare. And the couple took it very hard, because of course this wasn't how they planned on starting their life together. And the Kala was very upset. For weeks and for months after, she cried over what happened. And they kept wondering, who would call the police? Who would tattle on us? And they had no idea. But one thing they knew, whoever it was, they were never, ever going to forgive that person. Now eventually, they did find out who called the police. And it was actually a really good bacher from a good home who didn't have any bad intentions. He was just worried that many people were going to die because of this wedding. And it took a great deal of courage. But this bacher, this young yeshiva student, he called the father of the Kala on Erev Rosh Chodesh Elul, on the evening of the month of Elul, which is a time that we ask forgiveness between one another. and he said, I want you to know that I was the one who called the police. The father was completely caught by surprise. The Bacher continued, I regret what I did. I didn't call the police to be mean, God forbid. I was just scared, and I thought that I was saving lives. I knew that you were having a wedding, and I imagined how many people might get sick, and so I called the police. But I didn't imagine that they would arrest the Chatan and Kala. And the father of the Kala, he said, you turned the wedding into a funeral. How can I ever forgive you? And this Bacher, he said, I understand that you're angry at me, but please just listen to me. Before your daughter's wedding, I used to get many shidduch offers for marriage proposals. And I'm from one of the best yeshivas and a really good family, and I was considered a really good catch. But since I called the police on you, not a single shadchan has called me. It's like I've been cursed, and I'm certain that I'm being punished for what I did. So please, I'm begging you for forgiveness. And the Kala's father said, I will not forgive you for what you did. And the Bacher, who was still on the phone, started crying. And the father wasn't a mean person. He said, I want to forgive you, but I can't. Call me tomorrow after I've had time to think about this. And the next day, the Bacher called. And the Kala's father said something so deep. He said, I was awake all night, studying the words of our sages of blessed memory, Chazal. I read in the Talmud, Ein adam nokef etzba'o lemata. A person doesn't even stub their toe down here in this world. Im kein machrizin alav milmala, unless it was decreed from above. He said, I saw this lesson in Mesilat Yesharim and in Shari Tshuva, and I realized that everything that happens comes from heaven, and so it was already decided what would happen on the wedding night, and if you hadn't called the police, someone else would have. It was destined from heaven that we would go through this, therefore I forgive you. However, you still have to ask mechila, forgiveness, from the Chatan and the Kala. You see, my friends, the father who had every reason to be angry found it in his heart to look beyond the person and to realize that Hashem is always in charge. And so the Bacher called the Chatan and begged for forgiveness. The Chatan said, no, I won't forgive you. He said there are some things that are impossible to forgive. And the Bacher cried, and he told him about the Shidduchim. And the Chatan said, okay, fine. I forgive you, but you're going to have to ask forgiveness from the Kala, and I don't think she's going to forgive you. So the Bacher spoke with the Kala, and he explained he was the one that called the police and why he did it, and the punishment that he received, that he's getting no offers for marriage anymore, and his deep remorse and regret. And she said to him, how dare you ask me for forgiveness, and hung up the phone. The Bacher, of course, was devastated. He spoke to a rabbi that he was close to, and explained that without the Kala's forgiveness, he was afraid that he may never get married. He's sure he's being punished for what he did. And the rabbi knew the Kala's father, so together, the two of them, the Kala's father and the rabbi, went to the Kala and said to her, please forgive the Bacher. She said, no, I can't forgive him. Never. He ruined my wedding night. He knew what would happen. He knew the police would come. He knew it would be arrested. Why would you do that to a person? And the rabbi said to her, in the Zohar it says that when one forgives another person, even when it's hard for them, then they merit to have miracles. And the rabbi told her it was worth it for her to forgive the Bacher. She'll get credit to earn miracles when she needs them. And so, because of what the rabbi said, with tears in her eyes, she said she forgives the Bacher. And now a month later, on Erev Rosh Hashanah, just before the holiday of Rosh Hashanah began, the Chatan and Kala got into a terrible car accident. The car flipped over 7 times, and it was crushed like an aluminum can, and they were completely unscathed. There was Magen David Adom and Hatzalah, and everybody was searching to see who else was inside the car. But the young couple told them that there was no one to look for. It was just them, and they were perfectly fine. So the emergency workers said to them, how did you get out of the car? The car was completely crushed. And they said that the sunroof was open, and somehow, even though they had their seatbelts on, they flew out of the car through the sunroof. It was like a vacuum had pulled them out of the car. And they were brought to the hospital to be checked out, and there wasn't even a single scratch or drop of blood on them. And the hospital staff told them it's a miracle. And the Kala told them, we also don't know why this happened, but we forgave the Bacher who called the police and arrested us on our wedding night. And the rabbi said, this gives us merit for miracles. and she knew that it was the forgiveness that had saved their lives. You know, the story began with a wedding that should have been filled with only joy and simcha, and instead was a night of tears, police officers, detention. And for months after the Kala cried, she was in pain and angry. She swore she would never forgive the person who called the police. But then she listened to the wisdom of the Holy Zohar, which teaches us that when we forgive, especially when it's difficult, it opens the gates of heaven for us. And those two words, I forgive, were words that actually changed her life. Because when we forgive, we're not just changing the past, we're creating the future. We're not just healing old wounds, we're creating new possibilities that otherwise could not have existed. And so may we merit to forgive one another and to see miracles in our lives, like the Chassan and Kala in our story. I have one more story for you. This is about the Mittler Rebbe, Rabbi Dov Ber, who was the son of the Alter Rebbe, who lived from 1773 to 1827, and was the second Lubavitcher Rebbe. For the Mittler Rebbe, Lag BaOmer wasn't just another day. It was considered an exceptional Yom Tov, a truly holy day. And from the moment that he settled in Lubavitch, the Rebbe renewed the minhag, the tradition of celebrating Lag BaOmer in a field outside of the city. The Rebbe would have a small Suda, small festive meal with a L'chaim, and the Rebbe himself would say L'chaim with the Chassidim. Now the Rebbe was not healthy, and he wasn't able to say a L'chaim on Mashke, on Vodka normally, but this was a special gift that he gave his Chassidim on Lag BaOmer, and they would sing and dance with him with such incredible joy. It was known that on Lag BaOmer the Mittler Rebbe would perform miracles. Childless women would come to him, seeking blessings, praying that they would merit to bring a neshama into the world that would grow up to be a true chassid. And during the rest of the year, the Rebbe would send such requests to his holy brother, Reb Chaim Avraham, but on Lag BaOmer, he would bless the couples himself. And so the Chassidim would wait all year round for Lag BaOmer. They would count the days, waiting for the holy day to approach and get the blessings from the Rebbe. And after delivering a deep mimer, a Chassidic discourse, the Mittler Rebbe would do something special. He would call the elder Chassidim and ask them to share their memories of Lag BaOmer from former years. The elder Chassidim would sit and open their hearts, speaking words of Torah and telling stories of how things used to be, creating a chain of memory that linked one generation to the next. And after the Rebbe would leave, the Chassidim didn't want to depart from this holy space. They would continue to farbring, sitting together, sharing words of Torah, singing Nigunim for many hours later, as if they were collecting every precious drop of holiness from this day and storing it in their hearts to sustain them for the whole year. The fields of Lubavitch were ordinary fields every other day of the year, but on Lag BaOmer, when the Mittler Rebbe came with his Chassidim, those fields became like Mount Sinai. The ordinary became extraordinary. And now, of course, those fields have long changed, and the Sudot that they had are just memories. But the light that the Mittler Rebbe lit on those Lag BaOmer days, that light is still burning. It burns in the Farbrengens. It burns in the stories that we tell. And it burns in the souls of the Chassidim that are here today because a childless woman once received a blessing on Lag BaOmer from the Mittler Rebbe. We were married to receive all the blessings that flowed down on Lag BaOmer and to see miracles in our own lives and create memories that won't just sustain us, but generations to come. Thank you so much for listening, my sweetest friends, as always. Thank you to all the supporters of the podcast, everyone that reaches out to me. I really appreciate it. And I want to wish a special mazel tov to Eliyahu Yisrael in Manchester on his 6th birthday. Eliyahu, keep listening. And thank you for being such a loyal listener of the podcast. And to all of the children that listen, and all of the adults that listen, and all the Chassidim and Misnagdim, Jews and non-Jews, everyone, thank you for listening. I hope you have a beautiful Lag BaOmer, a beautiful Shabbos, and a beautiful week. And until next week, my sweetest friends, take care of yourselves, and sei gesund.